When you think of the European Middle Ages, do you imagine kings who never bathed, streets full of filth, indulgences that exploited the people, and hundreds of thousands of witches burned at the stake? Under the heavy exaggeration of clickbait media, the European Middle Ages seem to have become a paradise for barbarians. Even many scholars and popular science influencers have echoed the narrative of the Dark Middle Ages. In fact, this evaluation does not align with real history. We generally hold serious misconceptions about the European Middle Ages. Today, in just a few minutes, let's briefly analyze what's wrong with this historical view. First, we need to clearly define the time frame of the European Middle Ages. Typically, it is considered to begin with the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century and end with the rise of the Renaissance in the 15th century. Next, we can objectively evaluate whether the label Dark Middle Ages holds true by examining 5 key aspects: population, economy, education, culture, and religion. First, population. Throughout human civilization, before the Industrial Revolution, due to high infant mortality rates, population growth was always very slow. Therefore, when evaluating pre-industrial history, population size is the primary indicator. We can see that after the fall of the Western Roman Empire until around 600 AD, the population continued to decline. But after 600, it began to gradually increase. By around 1200, the population grew rapidly, until the outbreak of the Black Death in the 1300s, when it declined again, and then started to recover after 1400. Overall, during the European Middle Ages, the population of Europe showed an upward trend. If it were truly as some media portray it, a time of superstition and darkness where the common people suffered endlessly, then the birth rate should have continuously declined. Second, the economy. Looking at the overall economic development of the Middle Ages, although Europe did not account for a large share of the global economy, its economy was not in decline. Economic growth generally followed population growth. Third, education. Many people claim that the Middle Ages were ignorant and superstitious, as if everyone were illiterate and society was entirely backward and feudal. But it is important to know that the very word university comes from Latin. For example, the term faculty in modern universities originates from the Latin word for ability, and dean comes from the Latin word for leader. In fact, more than 80 universities were established during the Middle Ages. In 1088, the world's first university, the University of Bologna, was founded and is known as the mother of universities. Next, culture. Many believe that Europe had only one Renaissance. Strictly speaking, Europe has experienced 4 Renaissances so far. The first was the Carolingian Renaissance around 800 AD. Charlemagne supported education and culture, establishing many palace schools. He cultivated a large number of scholars and artists and preserved many ancient texts. For example, Alcuin, who advocated combining faith and knowledge, directly promoted the spread and revival of classical culture. Another figure, Origener, emphasized presenting faith through reason and constructed his own theological philosophy on a logical foundation. The Second Renaissance occurred in the 12th century. During this period, famous universities such as Oxford and Cambridge emerged. Disciplines like law, literature, and philosophy began to take shape. Scholars inherited the logical traditions of Aristotle from ancient Greece, and figures like Thomas Aquinas appeared. The third is the well-known Italian Renaissance from the 14th to 16th centuries. Humanism rose, affirming human value and dignity. This period saw a peak in the admiration of classical culture, with figures such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, Shakespeare, and Copernicus. The fourth, the most recent, took place from the mid-19th to early 20th century in Europe. During this time, society underwent widespread reform and progress, and existing systems and values were re-examined. Figures such as Victor Hugo, Chopin, Monet, Picasso, and Joyce emerged during this period. So why is the European Middle Ages often labeled as dark? This idea originally came from Italian Renaissance humanist Petrarch. In the 14th century, he strongly criticized medieval culture and education, arguing that it was vulgar, ignorant, and stagnant compared to the brilliance of ancient Greece and Rome. In fact, as early as the early 20th century, this view had already fallen out of favor in Western academia. However, due to the way world history has been taught and the general lag in historical scholarship, many people still accept and spread this idea without verification. This has led to widespread misconceptions, such as the claim that Europeans spent 1,000 years relieving themselves in public and never bathed, which is simply absurd. In fact, after the Crusades, returning Europeans brought back Roman bathing culture. Public bathhouses were common in major European cities. Even poor people could bathe in rivers. The idea that the Catholic Church used superstition to prevent people from bathing is also historically inaccurate. In reality, clergy and monks had their own bath facilities or used public bathhouses. Religious teachings only opposed excessive bathing and indulgence in luxury and pleasure. There is abundant historical evidence for this. For example, French historian Georges Vicarello, in his work on the history of bathing, describes the bathing life of 13th century Parisians. Not only did Europeans bathe regularly, they also enjoyed saunas. Kings and nobles even had luxurious private baths. As for the frequently cited example of Louis XIV, the Sun King, it is often claimed that he bathed only 3 times in his life. In reality, Louis XIV enjoyed bathing and even had a massive marble bathtub, which still exists today in the Palace of Versailles. In conclusion, the so-called Dark Middle Ages is more of a subjective, emotionally colored label than an objective historical fact. A simple look at reliable sources reveals that many of these widely spread claims are not true. Strictly speaking, the European Middle Ages was a period where light and darkness coexisted, where barbarism and progress went hand in hand, and one filled with change and unknown challenges. Follow me to explore philosophy in a simple way. In the next episode, we will enter the Carolingian Renaissance around 800 AD and get to know the famous philosophers of that time.